It's not just the words that come out, it's how you say them in your body.
Literally, our brain, if I say to you, I'll have a peanut butter and jelly on my socks, please, your brain does like a heart monitor. It says, what? I don't understand. Same thing when someone says, this is the American dream. That's not my American dream. So when your body language does not match your words, our brain literally picks up on it. Scientifically proven. Colgate University did a study. It says, wait a minute, I'm not buying what the candidate is saying or what they're objecting to. I feel like it's overly scripted or overly, coached.
Right.
We have a question right here.
Yes, how has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
Mr. Farrow, Mr. President.
Well, I think the national debt affects everybody. Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally.
On a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think
How?
think that they're going to be able to afford an education. I think that that's an important part of being a parent. If the question,
Tell me how it's affected you again. You know people who've lost their jobs and lost their homes. Well, I've been governor of a small state for 12 years. I'll tell you how it's affected me. Every year, Congress and the President sign laws that make us do more things and gives us less money to do it with. I see people in my state, middle-class people, their taxes have gone up in Washington and their services have gone down, while the wealthy have gotten tax cuts. I have seen what's happened in this last 4 years. When in my state, when people lose their jobs, there's a good chance I'll know them by their names. When a factory closes, I know the people who ran it. When the businesses go bankrupt, I know them.
And woman's question.
So I think that Bush's answer was trying to engage in an intellectual debate with her. And so he was specifically focusing on the content of what she asked and trying to, there was some sort of confusion that the woman had about what national debt was versus what, the recession was about. And he was sort of debating about that, and he was being slightly kind of aggressive in the same way that he might be with another candidate. Whereas I think Clinton realized that her question wasn't a policy question. It was more like just sort of a cry to, we're hurting, and what can you do to help us? And so Clinton kind of addressed the emotions of the situation and said, I know people are hurting, and I know you're hurting, and we're going to do what we have to fix it, right. Without really getting into the details so much. Right.
So one thing that I noticed was that in I obviously couldn't hear what they were saying, but in Bush's answer, he first walked towards the question asker with a very straightforward gait, and there weren't a lot of changes in his facial expression throughout his answer, which was much longer than Clinton's answer was, and there weren't a lot of differences in his motions. He made a lot of straight up and down motions and front and back motions towards the towards the question asker, and his brow was kind of furrowed, which I think he was trying to show that he was like thinking about this whatever issue it was with great depth and considered it to be a matter of grave importance. But then when Clinton started speaking, he started out with his head cocked to one side, which is something that people do when they're concerned, right? If you told me, how are you feeling? And you said, I asked you and you said, I'm not feeling so well. I went, right? Head goes to one side. So he seemed to be indicating some kind of empathy with what she had been asking. And he did a lot more of these round gestures, up-facing palms, kind of, just looking at it again, not knowing what they were saying, kind of indicating like something, we can all work on this, or like this is something that we can be inclusive in, as compared to these kinds of front and back, up and down gestures. Right. Then as his answer progressed, he did also furrow his brow and had some of these gestures as well. So I think this was a more holistic approach where he was involving both kind of the experiential and emotional aspects of people's problems or concerns, as well as a seriousness of purpose in solving them, not even perceive it. So some of those blinks that we saw in the video happened while Obama was talking, and I think in general people look at people when they're talking. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody would be looking at Obama, even if McCain's blinking, they're not really seeing that because their focus is on the speaker. Now when McCain started to respond and he was blinking a lot, I don't know how much that would have registered. It was a lot of blinks, right? It wasn't like a normal fast blinking. It was like an abnormal fast blinking. So I think people might pick up on that. The general public might see this as being a sign of nervousness, like a nervous tic. And that may show perhaps like a lack of sophistication about dealing with these kinds of deeply intellectual issues that they were discussing. And the other thing I would say is that people learn a lot about people's opinions and beliefs and characteristics by looking them in the eye. And so when you're blinking, you're obscuring your eye, and that may make you seem less trustworthy.
What should the other candidate do when the other candidate is talking?
Well, look right here. Do you see right there? We have McCain holding his wrist. The rule of thumb is the higher the hold, the more anxiety is told. You should.
When body language tells a story of a candidate is when it confirms a stereotype, right? It sort of fits a theory, you know. Gerald Ford didn't have, wasn't a slick guy, and so he was always following that sort of confirmed an image of him. Michael Dukakis weak on defense and a weenie, and so he looks like that in a hat. Howard Dean, kind of crazy and extreme. That was sort of the worry that people had about him. So when we saw heard the Dean scream in the famous, New Hampshire party, victory party, that confirmed people's worry about Dean. If you'd had George Bush scream, it wouldn't have sunk in because it didn't fit the image that people had of him and the worries that people had of him.
Right.
So I think body language matters the most when it fits into an image you have, a pre-existing stereotype of a candidate.
And so when these stereotypes are sort of fulfilled, that would then definitely affect the public's view.
Yeah, a picture tells 1,000 words, and when you have an idea about a candidate, if you're the opposition, you want to get across an idea of the candidate. If you're the bearer of that message, it's not going to be effective when they themselves, either in their words, but most importantly in an image, show that conveys that image and sears it in the minds. Writes about this. Gerald Ford tried to eat a tamale with the husks on. He didn't unwrap it, and it crystallized, this question of him being out of touch with a particular community. Right. So if Antonio Villaraigosa ate a tamale with the husk on it, that wouldn't have mattered because nobody sees him as out of touch with the Latino community. It was because it played an image that played to a candidate's weakness. That's
so when he eats it tries to eat it with the husk on, do you think that he then loses like a Hispanic vote?
Yeah, it became a sort of shortcut in the minds of voters to say, is this someone who's in touch with us or not?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Very
so
cool.
Confirming stereotypes really could hurt. Or I don't know if can it help.
It does confirming stereotypes and giving something that the news can repeat over and over again. Right. So if you have a 1-minute statement that clarifies everything that you stand for, it's hard to show that on CNN and so it's the news organizations are always looking for that soundbite, or even more important, an image that they can talk over and post in the background that solidifies an image of who you are, and so that's why content loses out to image.